All right. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this wonderful session that we're getting ready to have on leadership in pretrial justice. My name is Wendy Venverlo. I am the Executive Director of NAPSA, and I am thrilled to be with you here today. Just wanting to do a couple little housekeeping things. So if you'll remember, we had a few sessions in New Orleans at our 2024 conference that we had to cancel on the last day due to the hurricane that came in. This is one of those sessions. So I'm really excited that we're going to get to bring this to you today. There are a lot of exciting things happening at NAPSA right now. So if you haven't visited our website, I'm going to throw that in the chat here in just a moment. There's good information there as far as the conferences coming up in September of 25, which will take place in Atlanta, Georgia. We currently have a call for workshop proposals out right now. And so would love to have many of you submit some proposals so that we have lots of wonderful educational opportunities this coming September. In addition to that, we have other sessions like this one coming up. Next month, we'll be hosting Supervising Persons on Pretrial Release. That'll be on February 26th. And in addition, the standards, there's a little bit of information about the updated standards on our website, and the standards should be released publicly very, very soon. So lots of great things happening at NAPSA, including our session today. It is my great pleasure in just one moment to introduce two of my colleagues, but I did forget one housekeeping thing, which is we do have the Q&A feature enabled below. And so Kelly and Domingo will be answering your questions throughout and really are looking for interaction with all of you. So please, if you have any questions, put it in the Q&A, but you do also have the ability to chat with one another in the chat function. But if you could put the questions in Q&A, please. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce two of my colleagues who are both on the board, the NAPSA board, Kelly Bradford, who is our president, and Domingo Corona, our treasurer.
Everybody, and we're going to go ahead and start with introductions, and I'll let Kelly go first.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're at. My name is Kelly Bradford, and I am the current president of NAPSA, but I also work at the New Mexico Administrative Office of the Courts, and my current position is the Court Services Director here at the New Mexico AOC. And I've been working in the field for a long time. It definitely, I have more gray hair than you can see because of my hair colors. But I've been working in the pretrial justice area for well over 10 years in different aspects of it, everything from trying to move the needle with bail reform, pretrial improvements to our rules, our laws in New Mexico, to really standing up legal and evidence-based practices throughout the state. And so it's been a highlight of my life to be able to work in this field. And also to serve as a board member of NAPSA. With that, I'll throw it over to Domingo.
Hi, so yeah, I've been in pretrial. I've been in the justice system in pretrial my whole life, essentially. So I've been in pretrial for almost 27 years. This is my 26 and a half year. I'm currently the director of pretrial services in Pima County, Arizona, which, by the way, for everybody that's suffering through cold, it's going to be 57 here in Tucson today, which is kind of warm. I just wanted to say that. Now with that jab over, so I not only have I been with pretrial for 26 years, I've been in leadership about 25 of those years. I served as a lead, then a supervisor, then what is now an assistant director, and I've been a director now of the agency for the last 11 and a half years. I've been part of the NIC Pretrial Executives Network since 2015. I've been on the board since 2017, and one of the highlights of my career. And I've been part of the APPR, the Advancing Policy and Pretrial Policy and Research, since 2020. So I've been doing a lot of work as a local director, and I think it's a good thing to have Kelly and I both on this discussion, because Kelly is working for the AOC and sees things at a certain level, is working at the state level, while I work on state level projects. Generally speaking, I'm in a local leadership role. So we definitely have, perspectives that we can bring to the table. But I'm really happy to meet all of you this way and talk about leadership in pretrial. So what are some of the objectives that we have for this session? Really when it boils down to it, we want to help kind of frame and understand the challenges of work in pretrial justice, especially pretrial services. We're going to kind of start with that and kind of get into what pretrial leaders are faced with, what the field looks like, and that helps frame conversations we're going to have. And then be familiar with your role as a pretrial services leader, or if you're an aspiring leader, what that would look like. And then we're going to have discussions on how to best handle these challenges that you're going to be facing as leaders in the pretrial justice realm. Now, Kelly and I are both going to tackle this. The question is, like, why are we doing this? You know, why do we put together this session? And I'll let Kelly talk here in a second. Like Wendy said, you know, we really wanted to do this at the conference. You know, so we were hoping for a very interactive session, and we are still hoping for that. So, you know, as we go through this session, please type questions and comments. We want to address specific things, you know, that you guys have are facing or have faced or may face. And we're here to share our experience. Expertise is subjective. You know, we do have expertise, but at the same time, you know, we're facing things in different jurisdictions and you are at different levels, with different levels of resources, with different staff. So we're going to do our best to share, you know, our insights. Pre-trial, and I'll let Kelly go next, and then we'll move on to our actual session.
So when we were really trying to strategize for this session, we were trying to really, you know, answer the question, why are we doing this? And I think, you know, as Domingo mentioned, in all the different hats that he's, you know, worn during his career as well as mine, because I used to work at a local program as well, is we know how it feels to come into this field, one, as a new leader, a new manager, a new director. We know how it feels to maybe be an officer and be wanting to move up at some point. And these are really, really hard jobs, because we kind of find ourselves in roles that oftentimes we're not well prepared for, because we're being tasked to really culture shift individuals, systems, stakeholders. And so it can be a really hard job to figure out, how do I maneuver? How do I handle the landscape? How do I serve my employees well? How do I coach and mentor them? How do I get leaders to understand what it is we're trying to say? So these jobs are very exciting and rewarding, but they're tough and they're challenging. And so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to put together this workshop, and we were going to do it at NAPSA, is because we still go through those pains every day, even though we've been doing these jobs for quite a while. And we just it's hard, and we remembered how hard it was. We also want to create an opportunity for folks to connect with each other. So, I mean, as you're on here, scroll through, look at all the different people that are on here, see what names you recognize. Because one of the things we're going to touch on is how important it is to develop your network.
Yeah, another thing. Yeah, and then so you know, for NAPSA, in our role with NAPSA, we've talked about this quite a bit on the board. You know, and you know, when you look at who attends a NAPSA conference and benefits from the training there, and this is a pitch for those of you that have staff, or if you yourself have not been to the NAPSA conference, is that, you know, we have plenty of opportunities to see what other jurisdictions are doing in the field. You know, we have programs that highlight the progressive work that they're doing. We carefully screen, you know, the workshops to make sure that we have programs that are doing things that align with the NAPSA standards and judicial standards and laws. But also we have a lot of training for people new to pretrial, whether that be new to a pretrial organization, or new to the field, or new to the information that we share at the conference. You know, so we have fundamentals courses that we really, you know, stress, you know, that you attend and you participate in if you go in the conference and haven't been there. But and we have a lot of people that have been to the conference that kind of know each other, you know, that we've been going and seeing each other for years. And, you know, we've been aligning on different things over the years. We've been on projects, you know, we've you know, been part of trainings. But what we know is that, you know, we need to do a better job, a stronger job of working on that middle leadership tier. So in other words, someone who's been a supervisor in pretrial, or has just joined the leadership realm, or wants to go into leadership in pretrial. And, you know, how do we best, you know, educate, you know, and lift that person so that they're doing work at a higher level in their jurisdiction. So that's something that, one of the reasons that we want this to be an interactive conversation, is that we want to hear what challenges you're facing, because we won't know all of them, so we can kind of better construct something for our training conference, but also not just training conferences, but things like this, where we can do outreach. So you don't have to go to, you know, this year it's in Atlanta. You don't have to go to Atlanta this year. Maybe you can also do things like this to you know, learn and grow yourself in the profession. So again, participate as much as possible. We're going to reference a survey that was sent out to prepare for this training. And so there's elements from that survey we're going to discuss, but that's not going to encapsulate everything, I think, that, you know, you all are facing in challenges in your jurisdictions. So we're going to have a poll coming up here just to get an idea of what kind of challenges you're facing individually. And we encourage you to participate in this poll because we're gonna go back to it if we need to talk about things. So there's like, and when we talk about leadership, right, I think the key to leadership is developing the way you approach your work and the way you approach leadership. And this is my viewpoint. So when we're talking about this training, the easiest way for me, Domingo Corona, as a leader in pretrial and in my role, to kind of formulate a thought process around the things that I face in my role. Again, this is unique to me, but I feel like there are very similar themes that we talk about in pretrial justice. I put it into these 4 categories. One of the things is where do your staff work? Where is your work being done? I'm going to get into what that breakdown looks like. What is your political landscape in your jurisdiction? Politics, elected officials. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then what is your organizational structure? And when I'm saying organizational structure, it's not just your own pretrial organization, but where are you situated? And we'll get into the differences that we see there. And a huge one, and this is one that I think a lot of elements from the survey tell us is really important to you. Also, it's something that I've been a part of in different working groups, is funding, resources, and staffing. With staffing being a day-to-day complexity for a lot of us. There aren't very many pretrial organizations or government organizations, or even take that further, private sector companies that don't deal with recruiting and retention issues. It's a very serious challenge for any leader in any field. It's just putting it in context for pretrial leaders here or aspiring pretrial leaders. How does that affect you directly, and what things do you need to look for? Okay. And I think we may have a poll here. Okay, so do your best to answer this poll, and we're trying to just get an idea of what kind of. And remember, this is for this conversation, this webinar, but we also want to again put something together down the road, hopefully for the NAPSA conference or for webinars such as this, so we can kind of narrow down and address, provide guidance, relate some of the challenges that you have for future webinars and/or trainings. And we're seeing the results come in right now. And we, Callie and I and Wendy predicted which 2 categories would see the most responses. In our wise, assessments, we were right. We're seeing a lot of responses in political landscape and funding, resources, and staffing. Interestingly, I wasn't sure if this one was going to really, play to the degree it is, but organizational structure seems to be something also that is a challenge. And then physical location is so far in last, which ironically enough is our biggest challenge, one of our biggest challenges in Pima County. All right.
Yeah, what we're seeing is about 35% of folks identified political landscape as a challenge, and 43% funding, resources, staffing, lack of resources. And so, yeah, this is very similar to definitely in New Mexico, some of the biggest challenges we face.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving into the just breaking down some of the details behind, and again, this is something that I put together based on not only my experience in Pima County, but also in discussing, talking, meeting, networking with people from other jurisdictions. What are some challenges with physical location? Where do your staff work? These are some of the things that I think highlight. Sorry about that. A jail in Pima County Pretrial Services. We have 2 offices. One is at our downtown location. That's our supervision unit. But where we have some specific challenges is going to be with our jail office. It's not only just the fact that we're working inside a jail, which can be perceived as a more dangerous work location, but it's also that we're covering the jail. That means we're covering a time slot. Usually 24/7, 7 days a week is usually what you see with jail coverage. If you're doing screening universally, not just for court hearings, but if you're screening people that come in the front door, and that will affect other things in your organization, like staffing and retention. I know when I graduated college, I did work at our jail office. I did work graveyards. I worked swing shift, and I worked day shift. And it wasn't in my cabinet of dreams to be working graveyards on a Friday or Saturday night, but I loved it. But that's just something that you have to keep in mind when you're focused on how do you retain staff, how do you recruit staff. Not only that, but one of the challenges around the jail location is, for us, it's inside our sheriff's department, facility. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that we're judicial employees working in a jail location, and the culture in that building is different than the court culture, and we need to represent the court culture. So it's things like that that come up from a leadership perspective. Courthouses also are they present their own challenges. I know at least in our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions, that court expects you to be at your desk. There's a lot of there aren't a lot of remoting opportunities for us, in pretrial that can affect other areas. Also to just your access to the bench and the judges, their access to you is different if you're working in a courthouse. County buildings, depending on your organizational structure, are another place you can work, and there's other locations that exist out there that present their own challenges. I think on being understanding and aware of what those challenges mean to you as a leader and your staff and the work you do is really important. We would not be able to universally screen the way we do in Pima County without having access to our jail and having an office there. So one of my jobs as a director of pretrial is to make sure I have a good relationship and maintain a good relationship with our sheriff's department, because it's their building, not our building, and we have to make sure that that networking is strong. Challenges with your organizational location. So where are you situated? And this was one that I didn't expect to be as high as it was in the survey. So if you can enter into Q&A or ask, in chat, what kind of challenges you're facing, I'd be really happy to hear that. Because that's something that, again, we kind of predicted that the other options were going to be higher, but I'd really want to hear what exactly this is posing as a challenge to you. The court, my organization's situated in our court. I'm a judicial employee. I work for the state of Arizona. Even though we work in the Pima County, which is a county jurisdiction, we are state employees. So that presents certain challenges for me as a leader. We work for the judges, but yet as a judicial employee, who's supporting judicial independence and decision making, I have to provide feedback to our judges based on performance outcomes and the data that we see to those outcomes. It's not the most comfortable thing always to tell a judge, you're not releasing a lot of people, and we would like to see the release rate higher, because they do have judicial independence and they're dealing with a specific case. If that case causes an issue later, they're released and something bad happens, it's the judge that made the decision and not pretrial. So again, those are just things that you have to keep in mind as you walk through your career and as your role as a leader. Probation. I'm sure there are a lot of you out there who are under a probation office. That can present a challenge depending on how your mission is stated and how that's enacted through that organization. In other words, if you're a pretrial function under a probation office, is it a bifurcated function, or are you doing other things that kind of cause individual staff members to struggle defining their own role? In other words, you're working with a probationer who is convicted and turn around in the next minute you're working with a pretrial defendant who has not been convicted yet. That can present a challenge. So those are some of the things. There are organizations that are under the sheriff's department, and so that, again, at that point you're working for sometimes an elected official if your sheriff is elected, and also just the culture around law enforcement is going to be different than the court culture. We also have a lot of jurisdictions who are nonprofits. Our pretrial friends in Maine are a nonprofit. I know the city of New York handles pretrial differently than in Pima County or even New Mexico. And I think even in Wisconsin, there's jurisdictions that have nonprofit organizations that run pretrial, and those will present different challenges, especially when you're speaking of contractual relationships between the nonprofit and the jurisdiction that holds that contract. So these are just things that I think as a leader you're going to have to keep in mind as you go through your career. And our favorite is challenges with the political landscape. Pendulums tend to swing in justice and in government. That's not just national. We went through a change in leadership at the highest level in the United States, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing that affects us. We go through local leadership changes in politics. So, we have local prosecutors who may lose an election or retire, and the new prosecutor comes in. Like I said, the sheriff, for us, the sheriff is our, they're the person that oversees our our housing, our location in the jail. There's different changes with arrest practices that happen, which could increase or decrease your caseloads. So there's just so many things that can affect you in this area, unrelated to federal politics. And the local politics, I think, are sometimes more important for you as a pretrial leader to pay attention to. There's also laws. Later on, Kelly will talk about her favorite thing, which is legislative sessions. And so, law changes can affect the work that we do. Court rules can affect things. They can generate more. We have a local court rule or judicial order that created an entirely new program for us in Pima County that resulted in a change in policy, hiring of staff, more coverage at our jail office. It's a positive thing, but again, it's because changes in the political landscape and directions are very important, and also public sentiment and voting. Those people are unhappy. Especially if you have a judge who is a retained judge or elected a judge, that could affect that judge remaining in their position. And then last but not least, everybody's favorite challenges of funding, resources, and staffing. Funding source budget priorities are a big deal. So if they're getting a lot of public discourse or challenges from the public about the work that we're doing in pretrial services, that could affect overall program funding. You could have local, like for example, in Pima County, we have taxpayer, it's property taxes drive our budget in Pima County. So if we see less people moving into the county or people leaving, that affects the county's overall budget health, which affects us. Competing programs, right? Sometimes there's going to be a more focus on probation, or there's going to be a more focus on law enforcement. That could affect the amount of funding you get in pretrial or wherever you're situated. And of course, everybody's favorite, and the thing that I'm sure most of you are struggling with if you're currently a leader, is recruitment and retention. How do we recruit people to work in our field? I know it's the haircut conversation, and they always ask you, and I always dread it. Where do you work? Well, I work in pretrial, and I would say 9 times out of 10, I get a blank reaction, and so then I explain it. It's like probation, but it's not, right? I have a spiel for that. But there's so many people that don't know about pretrial services and the work that we do. So how do you recruit someone to an organization or a type of work that's generally unknown, for the most part in general society? So that's another huge challenge. And then once someone gets here, how do you convince that person to stay, in your organization or in your field? And sometimes it's not the best thing for them to stay. Maybe they go and they educate someone in a different office, and that's a win for you. But again, these are challenges that I believe we all face. Okay. And I'll turn it over to Kelly.
All right. So what is your role as a pretrial leader? And like I said earlier, a lot of us come into these positions in some ways having no idea what we're getting ourselves into. Because as a pretrial leader, because a lot of people either don't understand pretrial justice, they don't understand the difference between, say, probation or a treatment court, they kind of just make assumptions that it's all the same. And that's where, as a pretrial leader, we're kind of tasked with trying to explain a lot of the time how pretrial is not probation, or how it's not a treatment court, or how it's not X, Y, and Z. So a pretrial leader, you're really working to try to communicate and educate folks that are above us, beside us, and below us. And so that's a really challenging place to be. When I came into the field many years ago, and started talking about pretrial justice and pretrial reform and the use of financial conditioning and least restrictive, people thought we were crazy. And oftentimes people didn't want to hear from us. They didn't want to talk to us. And so it's really a challenging role as a leader to get your foot in the door, and to be able to have those conversations with legislators or judges or your court administrator or the sheriff or the DA or your staff, to get them to understand how incredibly important their jobs are and what they do and how it impacts lives. So it's being a pretrial leader is you're wearing multiple hats every day, depending on what meeting you have, what you're tasked to do, and how you're trying to basically be a culture shifter in your jurisdictions.
So I mentioned earlier that we had and I'll let Kelly talk about when because I kind of put this slide together, so I want to explain what it is before, we both talk about this. But, one thing that we did was we sent a prep survey, to see what kind of issues were out there. Here's some of the highlights of, what was in that survey. So big one, and the reason it's in the boldest, biggest letters font is that staff retention is a big deal for a lot of you out there. Promotions, career advancement. These are things that, we want to support as leaders: budget, funding, legislative changes, stakeholder buy-in, establishing a connection with, and the couple of comments, there's actually two around this: connection with your staff, but also connection with, your stakeholders and your judges is really important. Work-life balance,
I
making
haven't
sure that
figured that one out yet. The work-life
I haven't
balance.
either, and my staff is here, and I hope they don't comment, is that, they've been encouraging me to, take actual vacations, but, that some of us struggle with that, and how do we not only maintain our, ability to do that and take a break away from work, but also encourage our staff to do that. Change management is huge. There's always change in government, and there's always change. We talked about elected officials, public perception. Do you have any comments on these topics, Kelly?
I do, because I mean, the big things, definitely staff retention is a challenge for a lot of us, especially since post-COVID. I know that we're seeing it here in New Mexico. We're having a harder time filling positions. We're not seeing as many people apply for those positions. Public perception really has a way of kind of driving everything. And it's unfortunate that sometimes that kind of drives the work we do. It drives the policies we make. It drives the way we do what we do. And it definitely drives legislative changes or Supreme Court rule changes. It drives budget in the whole 9 yards. So this is kind of a good representation as a pretrial leader, all the different things you're trying to juggle and you're trying to kind of stay ahead of if you can. I would say, with staff retention, promotions, career advancement. In New Mexico, when we started our journey of implementing pretrial programs across the state, we started it in 2019. When I went into it, I knew that the people applying for most of these jobs were not going to come from the pretrial field. We'd have a few, but the vast majority of them were going to be coming from probation. They were going to be maybe coming from children, youth, and families. They'd be coming from law enforcement, that type of thing. So part of staff retention, promotion, career advancement is just kind of knowing going in that you're looking for someone who maybe has some understanding of the criminal justice system, someone who has the personality to where they're going to be open to education, growth, training, to maybe kind of shift them maybe away from probation type strategies and best practices to pretrial legal and evidence-based practices. And these are folks that you're going to want to invest your time in. You're going to want to invest coaching and mentoring and be patient with, because it really is a long game. And you're going to have folks that come in that realize this isn't their cup of tea and they may go elsewhere, but you're going to have those few that do stay in it. And so you really need to put time and effort into not just training them on how to supervise a defendant, but take time to teach them about pretrial justice. Start creating your local experts. It's amazing how much staff that we have here in New Mexico that they want to learn more. They want to be able to speak to these things. They want to understand why they do what they do is important. So I think that's a big piece of it. And that can also help them drive your public perception, because then they go out into the world and they talk to their neighbors, they talk to whoever, and they start to provide some education and understanding. When the neighbor brings up, oh, did you see that piece on the news last night? These darn catch and release judges, you can say, actually, let's talk about that. And so that can be helpful to just kind of the change management that really is at the center of being a pretrial justice leader.
And before we move on, because a couple of the comments in our survey talked about, providing specific examples, which we will do. But I did want to kind of point to a couple of the comments that were made in the chat. And one of them is from our colleague in Galveston, who Galveston, Texas, apparently has like 6 inches of snow right now. Aaron Johnson mentioned that in a committee meeting yesterday, which boggles my mind. But Aaron pointed out from the first set of responses in the chat, there's a lot of response in the chat about how different where the organizations are situated are. He said, as you can all see, pretrial is not cohesive across the country, which is why having these conversations are so important. And that is very true. It's one of the challenges the NAPSA board sees in providing training. It's just there's so many different venues for pretrial, that it's super important for us to get as much information as possible. Also, since NAPSA does generate standards, national standards, knowing what differences exist and what levels of resourcing and where you're situated is very important to the conversation around standards generation. So it's good that you're sharing. I'm trying to read as many as possible, but I do want to point out, Aaron, noticing that this is one of the challenges for us as leaders on the NAPSA board is how do we do outreach, and how do we provide guidance for people that work in so many different places with so many different missions. Another one that I think we need to point out is from Tyrone Harper, and he had a couple of people chime in agreeing, saying, I have found that I get frustrated and exhausted with hand-holding of so many stakeholders. They can really be disinterested in education, which, I have to say, when I first started in pretrial, and I'm going to age myself here, but it was in 1998. I wasn't very interested in education back then. It took me a while I went to my first NAPSA conference in 2004. What am I saying? 2024, 2004. And it really opened my eyes to national standards, and then from then I started kind of, networking differently, across different styles of work, and not just in my jurisdiction, but then looking at NAPSA, cohorts across the country and talking to them. I got there eventually, and one of the things that may need to happen, especially if you're struggling with stakeholders who are just seeming disinterested, is figuring out how to get that message across to them, and that may not be right away. That could take years. Oh, go ahead, Kelly. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I was gonna add to that because I think Aaron is absolutely correct, and I'm seeing a comment here from Carol Greenwell. Yeah, a lot of times, we go out and we try to do educations, and some stakeholders just aren't interested. The one thing that we have found to be really helpful is when you start to bring data to your conversations. And so, if you can get together and get commitment for stakeholders to meet maybe once a month, every quarter, once a year, whatever it may be, and you start throwing their local data at them and showing that, their public safety rates are this, or their court appearance rates are this. And that sometimes will get people interested because that's the data saying we could do better. And then that's where you can use that data to say, these are the things that come from the national standards, or these are the things that have been found to work. They've been researched. And if we want to improve public safety, these are some things we can do. Early on in New Mexico, we were very challenged with the political atmosphere, and people really weren't bought in. And so we also had to think about how we were going to change our messaging. And so we still use, pretrial justice and legal evidence-based practices and all that type of thing. However, we now explain that this is a public safety model, that implementing the essential elements of a high-functioning pretrial justice system, producing, collecting data, bringing it back to the local jurisdictions, using these strategies, using least restrictive conditions, our data can now show these things do improve public safety. So you have to get creative, and some people don't care about data, but some people really do care about data, and it will help kind of drive the shift that you're trying to make. You also really need to know your laws in your state. So every state is different. So when we get into a forum like this, the laws that Domingo has to work with in Arizona look very different than the laws in New Mexico. So in New Mexico, we didn't quite make the jump that Illinois did, but we don't have a lot of financial conditioning that happens in New Mexico because our rules changed in New Mexico. And so you need to really get very intimate with what your pretrial justice legal foundation is in your jurisdictions, and then figure out how you can apply the standards to that. And you have to start slow. This is a long game. And so any little change that you can make in the system to get closer to a standard is sometimes where you have to start. You have to meet your jurisdictions where they're at. You got to meet your stakeholders where they're at, and you've got to do incremental changes. Sometimes is the best way to start, but it's a long game. I mean, in New Mexico, we've been working on this since New Mexico v. Brown came out in 14, 15, and we're still working at it. We're still trying to educate. We still have people that are disinterested. We still have the media that puts out crazy stuff sometimes. So you have to have patience as a leader.
So we're going to get into specific examples now, and that we picked two areas, and Callie's kind of already talking about one, and that's legislative change, and actually kind of widen that up to any kind of political stuff that, she's kind of getting in that conversation. I'm going to, and the reason we chose these two subjects is because there were things that were discussed in the survey, so that people that, we thank you for participating in that prep survey. It really helped guide us. There's a couple things that we want to cover as specific examples. And Kelly, did you have more to say about the legislative work that you do?
Other than Domingo put in the slide, it's my favorite. It's absolutely not my favorite. And right now our legislative session actually started today. And in our odd years, we have a 60-day session. In our even years, we have a 30-day session. And it's a very stressful time. It's when we start to see a lot of bills that get filed that oftentimes are counterproductive to what we've been trying to implement over the last several years. I think there's always some good intent behind some of those bills, but there's a very big misunderstanding of legal statuses of defendants and legal and evidence-based practices. So, I would say the way that we've tried to deal with legislation or policy changes or whatnot is we always go back to what does the law tell us we can do and what do best practices say that work. And so, this will be my, I don't know, 6th legislative session, something like that. And every year we see many of the same bills. Many times we see little tweaks here and there. And at AOC, we have to do analysis of all the bills. And so it can be really frustrating. That picture he put there of me in real life looks much different at 11 o'clock at night. Usually there's tears running down my face and all kinds of obscenities being yelled as I read some of the bills. But the key here is, to create that network. This doesn't just start with state legislators. It starts with your county commissioners, your city councilmen, your mayors, your judges. It's really important to, as often as you can, is to get out. Don't wait for them to want to meet with you. You meet with them. Set up pretrial oversight committees. Get your stakeholders in a room. Go out and do neighborhood Q&A so they can better understand what it is you're doing. Put out your data. If you're not collecting data, collect data because your data is going to tell the story. And so you're not going into a meeting or into a one-on-one with a legislator or someone in some type of leadership role with your opinion. You really need to be able to back up everything that you're saying.
Yeah, so before we move on to the next to my thing, I want to point out a couple items. NAPSA, I'm a part of the NAPSA board, so I'm going to say this again, is that we provide some good training, not just in these online sessions, which are new and I think very very helpful. But also the national conference. I do want to point out, though, that Allison Shames mentioned she included her a link to the message board that APPR uses, and feel free to go there and click on that link and participate in that conversation there. There's a lot of professionals that in the pretrial justice realm that have conversations with there, and I have to give Allison and her team credit for working with us in Pima County on some of the messaging that we're talking about now. But she did comment, so I did want to mention that comment since they're a NAPSA partner and they do a great job. Also, Aaron Johnson mentioned the Texas Association of Pretrial Services. They have a fantastic, if you're in Texas or anywhere really or close to Texas, they have a really good training conference that they partner with NAPSA on. This year it'll be in May. I highly recommend attending the TAPS conference. It's a very good conference with very good instructors. Some of the instructors that do fundamental sessions there are the same instructors that teach at our national conference. Don't want to discourage you from attending our national conference, but Aaron and his team do a good job there. Now onto my example before we get into like a larger discussion with you, if you have any questions or comments for us. Is okay. So now Callie has talked about legislative, agenda items and working at that level. And Callie is very good, one of the best, if not the best in the country at doing that from the pretrial justice seat. One of the things I want to talk about in my jurisdiction, and it's really specific to like staff, we hope recruitment and retention, but also developing leaders. is what do we do to encourage people, to educate people on what it means to be a leader in the pretrial justice realm, or in the judicial system, but also, how do we get an understanding of what that would look like to better prepare themselves? And so, just to give you an idea of what we've done in Pima County that I'm very proud of, and I can't take sole credit for this. Our leadership team here is really good, and they've been very supportive of involving staff input and feedback. So what we do now for about, ever since I became director, maybe about 10 years, me and my team have put together a work advisory group, and that group is tasked with collecting staff feedback. And we, about 10 years, 11 years ago, we started doing a new onboarding training. And one of the things this group told us through staff feedback is that staff thought that training could be different. And even though I thought I was happy with the training, I thought it was good, but staff was saying, no, it's not. Like, you're giving us too much information about the job. We want to know what we do. Why are we here? So we did what a good leader should do. It's listen to your staff, right? We listened to what they wanted to hear from us. And one of the things is that there was actually a category, two areas. How do I promote? And then two, what does promoting look like? Because we had a lot of comments from people we were hiring that they wanted to be the director, and soon. Well, that's not normally the path you take. And so we want to let people understand that if you're not the director in 2 to 4 years, there's a reason for that. And I'm kind of exaggerating, but I think it helps kind of like get people to a place where they understand it's a process and there's things you got to do to get to that level. Now what we do, and this is a slide. This is taken directly from our current onboarding in pretrial. And what we do is I let staff know what it takes to be a leader in the justice system. And I've taken this from a survey of court leaders. It was by the Institute of Court Management. And what they did is they put together a list of things that the court itself feels is important, for working in the judiciary and the leadership role in administration. And, some of the things, for example, are meaningful input from all levels of the organization, why we do surveys. And these are tips I would offer to you, when you're looking to select your leaders and develop your leaders, but also if you want yourself to kind of get a better, bigger, broader understanding of what like the courts are looking for. Now, you may not work for the court, but you might work you definitely probably work with the court in some capacity. So I think it's important to know, what court leaders want. Selection of leadership based on competency, not seniority or rotation. I'm a firm believer in this, and it shows in our hiring practices for promotions. It's a different set of skills, and I tell my staff all the time, I don't hire because you write good pretrial reports. If you're going to get promoted, it's because you have great judgment. I want people to have good judgment in those roles. I need to trust people to be able to make decisions first and foremost. Transparency and accountability is tough, as a leader, because you can't share a lot of things that happen with staff individually. And I want my staff coming in week one. I want them to know that. Focus on policy level issues, proper delegation, very important for leaders. Providing clear, well understood roles and responsibilities. So this, as you can see, this list starts to educate staff as they come in the front door. If they eventually want to become a leader in my division, these are the things that I'm looking for in regards to how people behave in the role, how they act and how they make decisions. So this will be part of the PowerPoint, but this is something that I feel like, I think you start from the beginning. You start from the beginning to set that tone. What we also do with our new staff is we show them what leadership paths look like in our pretrial, right? So now, Kelly and I, when we're prepping for this court, this session, we talked about the fact that not every organization is going to look like this. I have a staff of 64 staff members. It's a fairly well-funded organization that covers 2 different offices, 24/7 function in our jail office, and we supervise. In the past, it's been up to 2,000 individuals, and our daily caseload's 2,000. Now it's about 1,300, but it's a good-sized pretrial organization for our jurisdiction size. Arizona, if we broaden the look of pretrial in my state, we have one pretrial in Greenlee County he covers pretrial, probation, he's a bailiff, and he's a judge. So, I mean, the rural jurisdictions have different org charts. So it's going to look very different in a smaller rural jurisdiction. But at least for mine, I go over this path. I put together a path, right? So, typically speaking, you work at one of the offices and you can progress. This path will show you progress to kind of like a quality control or leadership role. And then typically speaking, you can become a supervisor after that. However, I stress with our new staff, I skipped that role. I went from a pretrial officer to pretrial supervisor on the org chart. But then there's an assistant director after that, and there's a director, which is my current job. One thing I like to point out, though, if you see there, on the right hand side at the bottom, there's administrative program coordinator. We have a very skilled individual in that position for us right now, that has a very, very different background than us in pretrial. She's a researcher, and you have to bring someone with research skills. So that's not on the typical path, And I apologize. Doug Erler, I saw, was on this webinar, and I apologize because we hired away from Doug in Colorado, but I had to throw that in, Doug. I'm very sorry. But this just goes to show you that you want to make sure people understand that we have a role like that, that's a little different. They may need a little bit different background, to do that job, and don't necessarily think that's your career path if you don't have that, that education. So we explain that to new staff. So that way, I think one of the problems, it's not a problem, but if you don't educate your staff, people will get frustrated if they don't get a job that they apply for. And then if they don't get it again, I think people there's gonna be like a cycle of frustration because they feel they're not gonna be able to promote. I think if you set realistic expectations earlier, and this is an example of how we do this, I think that can kind of prevent some of that frustration going forward. And I do think, and it's gonna happen over time, but I do think we've been hearing less frustration when it comes to certain promotions for certain positions. And I hope that's something we can educate. It's our job, my job, to educate on this career path, going forward within my own organization. And I see Doug is very good with me on my job. So we're collaborators on a national level. So I'm very happy that he's joining us today. So
let me go real quick. If you go back
Yeah.
to that, the one thing I would add to that for folks who, are wanting to promote and kind of move up is, because in New Mexico, kind of the way we're organized is we have AOC, which is centralized our background investigation, a lot of our implementation, technical assistance. We have a remote supervision unit that assists our local jurisdictions. And then in each local jurisdiction, we have a pretrial program that has a program manager, pretrial officers, and even within those programs, we have kind of a ladder that's similar to this. So when I would say, here at AOC, when I have an open position for like a senior program manager or even a statewide program manager, one of the things that we do commonly is we give an assignment as part of the interview, because I need to see from my position, is this person have good writing skills? We'll throw a scenario at them that they have to kind of provide a writing assignment to. Do they have good critical thinking skills? Do they have good problem solving skills? How do they organize their document? And so sometimes we have people that apply, that's a shock for them. And they're not used to that, but it's because when you're moving up the chain, you're kind of taking your years of experience and you're layering it on throughout your career so that when you get to those positions, you can perform that job and do it well. And I have Cecilia Perry is on here. I saw her response. And so she was one of those that came from a local court to AOC as a statewide. And it was a big shift. It's a completely different type of job in working, and you're a pretrial expert, but you're not providing supervision and doing the day-to-day operations. Because the worst thing I want to do is hire someone for a position they're not ready for, because then that could set them up for failure as well. So there's definitely an empathy that's also a part of moving people through their career up, is that you want to get folks that are ready for these positions and aren't promoting too quickly.
So really quick, we're coming up on 10 minutes, and I want to share this. This is a survey for feedback for us, and I'm going to come back to this. But if you have a chance to scan this now and start getting information in, I think this would be a good time to do that. And again, I'll bring this back up before we close out. And we have a slide after this that's about discussions happening now, but I wanted to bring this up for now. So just going back to the tools in your toolbox. So what are some things that and I've been reading the comments. I'm sure Kelly has, and I thank Wendy for answering some questions that have already been posed in the Q&A. But I think it's important to just kind of revisit some of the stuff that Kelly and I have been alluding to. Data is really important. I can't stress enough. So there were a lot of survey items around how do you move the needle? Like, how do you retain staff? How do you educate? There were comments in this chat here about the chat about, like frustration with stakeholders and communicating with judges. The number one way that I have been able to do this, and I think someone else mentioned, I think Doug Coppin mentioned, like your engagement with, building that connectivity with your stakeholders and your judges. I 100% do that, but that's only going to go so far. Right. I think that's an important integral part of like you pushing the needle, you moving your program forward, protecting your program, and even with staff, developing that connection with staff. I think if you don't have the data to support that, as an evidence-based field, legal and evidence-based field, if you don't have the data to support the work that you do, or to even direct yourself in an area where you may not be doing as well as you think, I think that the connectivity only goes so far. I mean, Kelly, you would agree this is probably number one.
No, absolutely. Data has been a huge factor in what we do. And when we first started out, I didn't have New Mexico data. And so when we were going out to different counties and stuff, we would use data from Kentucky or DC, New Jersey, wherever. And of course, the first thing we would get is, well, that's not us, we're different here. And so in the background, we were creating our data infrastructure, much of which I stole from Joel Bishop, who's on here. So he knows data really well. And so then I was able to start getting some New Mexico data. And even then we'd go to a certain county and they'd be like, well, that's great that that's what Bernalillo County looks like, but we're not Bernalillo County, we're different. And so every step of the way, we had to keep collecting and bringing data so that when we finally got to that jurisdiction and they couldn't say anymore, this isn't our data, we're different, because it was their data. And from that data here at AMC, we can kind of get in and look at that data and we can identify where improvements can be made and then take it back to the stakeholders. I think Joel asked a question is, what is the main factor to consider when trying to bring high-level stakeholders together? Is really the personalities that are going to come into that meeting. The one thing the courts can do a really good job at, if you can get, a champion within your courts, is courts are really good at convening people. If a judge convenes a meeting with DAs and public defenders and defense attorneys, law enforcement, a lot of times, not all of them, but many of them will show up at least to that initial meeting. So that initial meeting, you definitely want to kind of catch everybody's attention. Another key thing to realize when you're bringing stakeholders together is you don't want it to be you talking at everyone. You want to create dialogue. You want the pushback to come out in the room. You want to understand where each of your stakeholders sit on a certain issue and how important it is to them. And so oftentimes people get really uncomfortable in meetings when people are pushing back, but you need to know you need the pushback, because that helps you gauge if you're trying to facilitate this or you're trying to champion it, what are the real issues in the room and who has those issues, so that you can better address those moving forward.
So I do want to highlight one of the comments and questions. It was more of a comment from Catherine Drummond. So my team and I attended the last national conference, which was really enlightening. But as a small team with only 2 officers, we left feeling somewhat discouraged because there are so many great initiatives that we just don't have the staffing to implement, which is it's a big challenge for smaller if it is a smaller rural jurisdiction or it's a resource issue, whether it's one or the other or both. I mean, that's going to be something that will feel discouraging. Going back, I want to take it back to the tools. I think if I were in your jurisdiction, I think the number one thing I would do would be to reach out and see what's happening in other smaller jurisdictions. For example, I want to reference Kelly's program in New Mexico, the statewide program. They've found a very innovative way to work in that kind of an area, and that's to kind of consolidate resources and create essentially hubs for the work that's being done. So it's being done at the state level, but also the local level at the same time. And even if you don't have that statewide, networking or setup, I would assume there's other jurisdictions that would be willing to share what they've done to help, kind of drive up the work in their area. But I do think, going back to the tools, I think for me, it would be, what is the volume you have, being able to capture data somehow, and it's harder in a smaller jurisdiction. Capture that data somehow. Really, for you, I would think if it's me sitting in your shoes, what is the network you can develop. I know APPR has been working with rural jurisdictions. NAPSA is always, you can always reach out to us, and we can help connect you to different individuals. It's something that I think the field really needs to work out. It's something that's, I think most innovative preacher work starts with in an area where I think things have already been established, and then now you're trying to build on that program. You're talking about establishing a program in the first place. So, I would say reach out to someone on the NAPSA board. See who we've heard from that work's being done, in their jurisdiction with smaller resources or smaller counties. Know your data. Know what do you need to accomplish with the size of the population, defendant population you have coming in the front door, and see how you can kind of move the needle little by little. I would say that, like, those two things are the biggest things. Kelly, do you have any advice, since you have kind of hit this challenge head on?
Yeah, I mean, in New Mexico, we took all of our local program managers that we have throughout the state, and we created what we call the New Mexico Pretrial Executives Network, which was kind of a takeoff the National Institute of Corrections Pretrial Executives Network. And so they meet monthly, and it's just the program managers, and they talk about all the different challenges that are going on across the state and their local jurisdictions. They help to, make changes to guidelines the AOC puts out. And in many ways, it's like a support group, to be honest. So I would say, because these jobs are really hard, don't ever stop reaching out. I reach out all the time. I'll send out an email probably next week to Domingo and Joel and a bunch of other people saying, hey, this is going on. What are some talking points? How would you handle this? How would you deal with this situation? Or, hey, I got this idea, but I don't know how to execute it. What do you think? What am I missing? And so that's kind of the beauty, I think, of pretrial in general, is we kind of have this national, huge, almost family that we can reach out to and ask questions no matter how long we've been working in the field. So if you're not doing that, start doing that, because you are probably dealing with the same issue that somebody else is someplace else, or an issue that they did deal with, and this is how they problem solved it and what was the outcome of it. And they can also give you lessons learned of what not to do. So we really have to, from a pretrial justice standpoint, we've got to really leverage each other and what we know, what we have learned, what's going on out in the field. Because I think someone said, in the comments, we're a really small program. There's only 3 of us, and there's no way we can implement all this stuff. And so if you're collecting data, even if it's on spreadsheets, and you start somewhere, your data is going to help support your resource need in asking for funding. And so sometimes it takes a while, but reach out, find out how other jurisdictions that were small did it. In New Mexico, we have some programs that have, 15 employees in them. We have some programs that have 30 employees in them, and we have some that have 3. And so they're all very uniquely different, but they reach out and they ask each other like every day. There's IMs going out across the state about, I have this situation. How do you guys deal with it? Create your network.
Okay, getting to a couple of the questions or comments in the chat. Wendy posted a link for regional networks. I think, Catherine, that's a good place for you to reach out. And there was another question about the Ohio Association of Pretrial Services. Yeah, so definitely reach out to your regional directors. You can reach out to anybody in NAPSA, but they're going to know more than, for example, Kelly and I, who don't work with the regional networks and know what's happening in that region specifically. So I think that was, thank you, Wendy, for that. That's really, really good guidance. So we're down to 2 minutes. So I have the leadership and pretrial justice, feedbacks link up. Please do not forget to say something nice, constructive, not so nice. When you're in the pretrial field, you need to have a thick skin. So please have at Kelly and I. We want to hear what we can do better for these kinds of trainings in the future. Any last question that we can answer before we? Someone else with my Anthony Domingo. I don't see my name very often. It actually weirded me out. So it's good to see someone with my name somewhere. Yeah, if there's any last questions.
We hope to do another session like this, hopefully at the conference, where we can all get in a room, really have some really good dialogue.
I think Kelly is volunteering to do that again.
Probably. And so aren't you, Domingo?
I am. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you guys, and I hope this information was useful. Very happy to have you all join, and I look forward to seeing all of you at the conference this year.
All right, thank you all very much. And we will be posting this video on our YouTube channel, so be on the lookout there. We'll also send that out via the link via email. So please stay connected. If you are not yet a member, please consider joining. There's a lot of great things happening. So on behalf of Kelly and Domingo and the NAPSA board, I'd like to thank you all for being with us today and have a wonderful day.